Egypt calls for UN-backed intervention in Libya, while the country's media reports another 35 Egyptians held captive in Libya by the Islamic State. With the truce in eastern Ukraine all but collapsed and fighting in the key town of Debaltseve, the EU calls for an immediate pullback of heavy weapons. And Israel's state controller releases an annual report, this one documenting excessive and improper spending in the prime minister's residence, prompting calls for a criminal investigation. Good evening and welcome to the news today. The fight against a range of terror groups in the Middle East brings us tonight to Iraq, Egypt, and to Libya. In Iraq, a horrifying report from a local police chief in the town of al-Baghdadi, who says the IS has burned to death 45 people. Meanwhile, after the latest video thought to show the beheading of 21 Egyptians in Libya, Egypt has called for a UN-backed intervention there. And indeed, tomorrow the Security Council is set to meet to discuss the issue, while military chiefs from around the world will gather in Saudi Arabia on the fight against IS. We'll look at the whole picture, but first, a look back.
Fueron asesinados por el solo hecho de ser cristianos. La sangre de nuestros hermanos cristianos es un testimonio que grita.
Should push all the sides inside Libya to realize that Daesh is a threat to the entire country, to all the Libyans, and that would require a joint action to face the threat.
إن هذا العدوان الغادر والإرهاب الذي قاده السلاح الجوي المصري يمثل انتهاكا صارخا للسيادة الليبية.
إن مصر تحتفظ لنفسها بحق الرد وبالأسلوب والتوقيت المناسب للقصاص من هؤلاء القتلة.
And joining me tonight is former Israeli ambassador to Egypt, Yitzhak Levanon. Good evening.
Good evening, Norit.
And of course, Iranian politics analyst Meir Javedan Far.
Good evening,
Good
Norit.
evening. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So, Ambassador Levanon, I want to start with you. There already is a coalition against the Islamic State, over 60 nations, and there has been chaos in Libya for a very long time now. Why now, and why Libya?
Well, first of all, let me remind you and the people who are looking at this program is that after 6 or 7 months that the coalition has is pounding, let's say, the Islamic State.
I have a feeling where this is going. It's not doing its job?
No, it's not a question of doing the job. It's doing the job, but it's not changing the equation. And we have seen that at the same time an expansion of the Islamic State outside the perimeter of Iraq and Syria, which was the original place where they declared the caliphate. Now we see, that they exist, they have the vilayet or the province in Sinai. They are close to the Lebanese border, and now it is in Libya. If they will succeed to be in Libya, to install themselves in Libya, a stronghold in Libya, we are going to have, two fronts for Egypt, one on the east and one on the west. The second point is that they are going to be close to Europe. This is why the international community...
It seems they already are, their presence, whether it's homegrown terror or not.
And this is why there is a huge interest now, after what happened, with these 21 people killed and beheaded. So the international community, the Islamic world and the Arab world, and Egypt specifically, they're all interested now what's going in Libya. But the chaos was existing like three years ago.
Before we get to all the key role of Iran, let's see a little more of the background. More on Egypt's efforts to commit the global community to the fight against IS now in Libya in the following report from Shai Ben-Ari.
The international community's struggle against the Islamic State terrorist group is now threatening to spread to other countries beyond Iraq and Syria. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has called for a UN intervention in Libya following the murder of 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians by Ansar al-Sharia, a Libyan terrorist group which has aligned itself with IS.
Yes, there is no other choice, taking into account the agreement of the Libyan people and the government, and that they call on us to act.
Egypt already responded Monday with airstrikes against jihadist targets in the Libyan city of Derna. The Libyan military said 64 terrorists were killed in the strikes. Sisi, however, is adamant that the international community has not fulfilled its obligation to the Libyan people.
What is going on in Libya could change this country to a breeding ground that will threaten the whole region. And not only Egypt. Egypt, the Mediterranean basin and Europe have to deal with this problem because the mission was unaccomplished, was unfinished by our European friends. We abandoned the Libyan people as prisoners to extremist militias.
It is interesting to note that Sisi is focusing his demands towards European countries, neglecting to mention the U.S. This is another indication that relations between Cairo and Washington are not as they once were. It could also reflect the realization amongst Washington's partners that the White House is looking to limit its involvement in the region to a minimum. With no Western ground forces engaged against IS for the time being, others in different parts of the Middle East are offering to expand their efforts.
We may not have spoken about Iraq before, and we've had limited presence there during this first phase, but I say let's all go to Iraq. Let's go to any place where we can fight this threat that is threatening our Muslim nation and our region, because that is the way to defend Lebanon and to defend the people of Lebanon. And that is how big powers behave in the world.
Back in Libya, Tuesday marks the anniversary of the uprising which eventually led to the fall of former dictator Muammar al-Gaddafi.
On the 4th anniversary of the revolution, I truly wish that all the Libyan people would come together and at the same time end the bloodshed in all areas and cities of Libya.
The severity of the situation in Libya is such that there are those today who actually miss the relative stability of the Gaddafi era. Yet another reminder that in the Middle East, it is always difficult to know what to wish for.
And before we return to the Middle East, we move to Washington for a moment. The White House Summit on Countering Violent Extremism, something that has been sort of long awaited there, began today, a 3-day summit. And joining us on the line from Washington, D.C. is Farah Pandith, former and the first U.S. State Department representative to Muslim communities. Farah, thanks very much for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So as the summit has begun, first of all, can you give us a sense of the aims? I understand the idea is how to stop radicalization inside communities.
Yeah, and I think most importantly, I mean, this is a first-time effort that we've seen on behalf of the United States to bring the concept of countering violent extremism, the ideology that inspires the recruitment of extremists. And let's be clear that that's what this is. To have a 3-day period of time in which not just our country, the United States, but other countries around the world have been invited to share and to talk about what's taking place and, indeed, aspects that are happening on the ground that, in fact, might be able to be scaled up and things that we could actually look to as examples of how to stem the tide of recruitment.
Farah, you have a lot of experience, obviously, in the United States dealing with Muslim communities there. What have you found in terms of how radicalization within communities, whether it's the United States or Europe, can be prevented? What are the first steps that the United States and Europe, for example, need to be taking right now?
Well, so I want to be clear about the jobs that I had at the Department of State, because I was looking at Muslim millennials, those under the age of 30 all around the world. My job was not only focused on one part of the world, but it was a global thing. And the reason why I say that is because you have to look at the demographic. That is the key here. It's something unique that is happening to millennial Muslims, whether we're talking about kids in Surabaya, Indonesia, or we're talking about kids in Suriname or Stockholm. This is something that is affecting this generation. What is that something? They've grown up in a post-9/11 world where every day, all day, they've seen the word Islam and Muslim on the front pages of papers, online and offline. That, alongside with a lot of world events and other narratives that are streaming onto their telephones, they're impacting the way they live their lives, have affected the way they think about themselves, and they have affected sort of their identity. And the reason why that's important is because that's the weak point that the extremists come in and begin to seduce and recruit kids, boys and girls, from around the world. So for me, this isn't what is happening in San Francisco or what exactly is happening in Stockholm. What we should be asking is what's happening to this generation of young kids that is giving them this idea that they have to be something that the extremists say they need to be.
I want to just take it for a moment to the sort of way that it's dealt with by the United States, by Europe. Clearly, several countries trying to sort of deal with homegrown terror and exactly these youth that are becoming radicalized. There's been quite a share of criticism of the Obama administration of late, of a sort of refusal to call it what it is, to use the words radical Islam. When you have terror groups like the Islamic State and Boko Haram that seem to be really taking Islam and turning it into something completely different that has nothing to do with moderate Muslims, maybe is that distinction necessary? Is the administration missing something there?
We've had a conversation about lexicon since 9/11 in our country. It's been a political issue. It's gotten really crazy, and I really actually think the more time we spend talking about splicing and dicing what the thing should be, the time we're spending taking away from the real issue. The bad guys that we're talking about right now, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, are not preying upon kids of any other sort of background than those that have an affiliation in some view, emotionally, spiritually, with a religion, and they twist the religion to work it for them. Now, we all understand that Islam does not promote violence. We get that. We've had that conversation for 14 years after 9/11 now, right? That isn't the issue. The issue is if those are the groups that we're trying to fight, and we know that they're building their armies based on Muslim youth who are moved and seduced in a direction to help fill their armies, what is it that we have to do ideologically to stop the recruitment? One, we have to name it in terms of what it is. It's young Muslim millennials under the age of 30 that are promoted in this way. Secondly, the bad guys are unbelievably savvy and are using all kinds of methods, online and offline, to evoke emotion.
Is the
and to bring
U.S.
those
prepared?
kids in.
We hear here in the studio a lot about the obviously very advanced sort of level in social media that these terror groups use. They're in no way primitive in that sense. Is the United States and Europe, is the West prepared to combat them on that front?
So, my friend, you've asked the question of the day. It's not just as America and Europe prepared. It's the world understanding that we can beat this. We're not, the bad guys aren't so smart and so sophisticated that they've come up with tools that no one's ever heard of. My goodness, we are able to advertise, we're able to promote ideas in a wide view of different industries. How is it that we're not using that acumen to go into this debate? The question becomes, what's stopping us? And there are two main things. One is, are the money and resources needed for this only U.S. or European or government monies? No. The answer is no, because the credible initiatives that need to happen need to come from monies and support from outside of government. But secondly, we have to absolutely understand that the vast majority of recruits can be stopped. And when you ask the question, what is stopping us from doing what we need to be done, I will say in our country there's been a very slow build-up and ramp-up to understand how we have to invest at the local level. We're seeing nano, micro, tiny little initiatives here and there that are no competition for what the bad guys are doing. If we're going to win this, we need to scale it up massively. We know what we need to do. We have solutions. They're affordable. We just need to blow it out big and understand that it's a generational threat that can be reduced massively.
Some advice that I think several governments should heed from you this evening. Farah Pandit, thanks very much for this.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, Meir, we hear her saying we have the ability to beat this. Of course, it's funny kind of thinking about the power of American advertising, for example, and targeting and social media and so on. You have this White House summit, you have a call for UN intervention, you have the coalition. Why has IS managed to spread despite all of that?
In my humble opinion, IS has managed to spread and it will keep on spreading. Unfortunately, I think we'll keep on having these conversations over and over and again because in my opinion, nationalism has failed to provide people with the basic needs. nationalism has failed to provide people with a standard of living, with a level of education. And unfortunately, I think in Egypt we saw one of the examples, and one of the leaders of the Al-Tahrir revolution was a secular liberal. He ended up fighting for ISIS, and he was killed. There's a race here, Nurit. There's a race between nationalism versus Islamic fear and extremism, which ISIS is leading. And for now, the fear and extremist religious seem to be winning because the nationalists are not providing the answer. And this is unfortunate. This is a trend that's going to continue.
Is Iran also winning?
I think Iran is winning in Shia areas because, unfortunately, in this region, when the Sunnis take over, they discriminate against the Shia in a terrible way, including ethnic cleansing. And then when the Shia win like in Iraq, they do the same. There's retribution of their payback in kind. So this
and Iran is building up quite a presence in Iran.
Among the Shia, they are. And things could improve with Hamas, which would be the only Sunni organization. There are reports that things might be.
Iran is gaining. It's obvious. If you will make the comparison between Iran 30 years ago, 35 years ago, when Khomeini came and he wanted to export so-called the revolution, he succeeded, or Iran succeeded, only in one place. It was in southern Beirut, Dahya. Now, we see Iraq, we see Syria, we see Yemen with the Houthis.
They're all Shia. That's exactly what I mean.
Well,
so is Iran setting up sort of satellites and building them all across the Middle East?
It's because the Sunni countries where the Shia are living, they've been discriminating against them. And this provides Iran with an opportunity to go in there.
And be the savior against the Sunni IS.
I wouldn't say Iran is one in a way that I think overwhelming majority of people of Iran don't want this regime. But it's winning in other areas because it's the only other option to help the Shia. If there was a better, more functionable option, which was better performance, I think people would choose them. I actually think after 36 years after the revolution, it's been a failure in Iran. But it's been a success in Lebanon and in parts of southern Iraq. Why? Because they get Iranian money, but they don't get Iranian government management and bureaucracy, which is what's basically led to the unpopularity of the regime.
Money and weapons without bureaucracy is ideal, it seems. Let's move from Iran for a second to its arch-rival, to Saudi Arabia, which is also playing some sort of role. Not clear how big. Today, a meeting between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and an announcement that Saudi Arabia will hold a meeting of global military chiefs on Libya on IS tomorrow. Where is Saudi Arabia in this picture?
Well, there was going to be a conference in Egypt on the 15th and 16th of March in order to raise money for investment in Egypt, in order to help President al-Sisi in Sharm el-Sheikh. But according to reports, because of the fall in oil prices, some of the Persian Gulf countries are not going to have the expected money that the Egyptians were hoping. So I think basically on the financial front, things are not as they were before. They are calling for more investment.
Saudi Arabia is key in that, is it not, in terms of oil production?
There are concerns that since the death of King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia, because of the new person in charge, and also because of the fall in oil prices, they may not be able to provide as much cash as they were before. It may come in the form of investment. And I think this is something that could hurt the Egyptians. But of course, also, let's not forget, militarily, it's mission impossible for Egypt.
Well, look, this is not only Egypt. I think that the competition existing between Saudi Arabia, the Gulf state, let's say, led by the Saudis, and Iran, it still exists. I mean, there is this competition. Sometimes it's obvious, it's clear, it's and sometimes it's behind the scenes. This competition will continue. But I would like to call your attention about something which, we have a new king in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And already in the 3 weeks that he have been, invested as, the king of Saudi Arabia, he did some changes. And people are asking questions in what direction, political directions, Saudi Arabia is going. We have seen some signs, or let's say insinuation, if you want, that Saudi Arabia might change.
For the better? What kind of changes has he made?
In my eyes, it's not for the better. But they might change, their relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance. There have been, a lot of animosity between Saudis and the Muslim Brotherhood and supporting Egypt. But this new king might change a little bit the situation maybe convinced that the Muslim Brotherhood can help, let's say, the moderate political Islam versus the
and that will
extremists.
change the game for Egypt, which is clearly
it will
under
change
al-Sisi
for Egypt, etc.
against the Muslim Brotherhood.
But I would like, in parentheses, if you will permit me, what Farah say. I do understand that for her everything started after September 11.
But for the rest of the world,
but it's
not
wrong.
So much.
It is wrong. You see, Al-Qaeda was existing.
Is it a fundamental misunderstanding in the West, not just in the U.S.?
I think that there is a misunderstanding, of the mentality of what's going on in the Middle East. The Al-Qaeda was existing a long time before,
and
September.
Funded by the United States at some point.
Before that, we had the jihadi Islamic Jihad. We have it in Egypt. 15 years ago, we had Al-Jama'at al-Islamiyah who killed Sadat. Before that, we had the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Islamic Jihad or the extremism or going towards this extremism, this is something that we have seen it during the years.
This is exactly what we're here for, is to see these sort of points that in the media or in the perception, the Western perception, look to be a starting point that actually there's always something, there's always more context in the Middle East.
When we talk about Libya, let me ask you a question. Which tribe do you belong to?
One of many, many, many.
Well, after 12 Jewish tribes, which one do you belong to? You don't know, because the country where we live in, it doesn't matter.
But
in Libya is 140 tribes, okay?
So chaos doesn't even begin to cover.
By 30, and between them, they've chosen 30 people to represent them. This was during the day of the revolution. Now it's even more fractured. And again, this is the failure of nationalism in order to provide the answer. People fall back to the original tribes where they come from. This makes it more difficult to have a centralized state. And when there's no centralized state, people latch on to whatever there is, and this is why the extremist organizations are thriving, and this is why they're going to thrive even more. The question is not that will not come from Washington, will not come from London, the answer will have to come from Arab countries finding a solution to the basic needs of education, somebody picking up the trash in the morning, roads, and the basic things that we take granted.
You had for a whole year the Muslim Brotherhood, where the ideology, Islamic ideology, which is against, let's say, what you are calling the nationalism, they didn't bring any good for Egypt. No education, no taking the trash, or anything else.
But ISIS is doing it, and they're even more extremists. That's the problem.
ISIS is using the
situation. The same thing we see with Hamas is you have a terror group that says, hey, I'll give you a little bit of money, I'll give you a good job. ISIS, we hear, pays quite well,
$400 a month, I think. I think, in a way, I think this is a PhD worth of a study that we're not going to get through here. I think we have to do Muslim Brotherhood versus ISIS, which has been more successful as a nation-state builder in the basic needs. Apparently, again, I'm just quoting reports because nobody knows what's happening in ISIS-controlled areas. They have a health system, they have doctors, they already have schools up and running, they pay their fighters.
So what does it say about the Middle East that we have countries? What does it say about the Middle East that we have countries where there is no set, complete state, and where the government or governments, in Libya's case, and militias, cannot form a basic economic, healthcare, decent salaries, allow people to live, and the terror groups are the ones who can do it?
Because of the regimes that you have seen in the Middle East. You see, after the Second World War, we have seen the nationalism over, the whole Middle East, starting with Nasser and all the leaders that we have seen. And this, in 2010, 2011, when it started in Tunisia, collapsed. It is disappearing. We don't have. In Syria, you have a fragmentation of the country. In Lebanon, there are even, fighting each other. Libya is completely in chaos.
Nurit, you could ask, can you import something from abroad? If that's your question.
Well, the United States.
I could give you the answer. Look at Afghanistan. They spent $190 million a day in Afghanistan, and looked at, and it just goes to look. The Americans, God knows, they tried their
unimaginable
best,
figure.
but you can't, because again, this comes from a millennia worth of history and culture,
which seems to not be understood.
Which goes back to your tribes and religion. I'm a perfect example, a Jewish Iranian, and I'll be absolutely honest with you, I feel more comfortable with my Jewish brethren in Israel, as much as I love Iran and I'm proud of being a Persian, in expressing myself and in my sense of belonging than my Persian nationality. This is just, that's just one example. Now imagine how the Sunni feels in a country where it's majority Shia, or a Shia feels in a country where it's majority Sunni.
The tragedy is that the country who can do something is the United States.
Really?
Well, not
Yeah, but wait a minute. Wait a minute. But the tragedy is that they do not understand what's going on. No, we heard, what Farah is saying. Look, it is impossible that the United States, from one hand, Sisi and Egypt, I take the example of Egypt, are saying to the United States, look, the Muslim Brotherhood, they are out of the law, they're outlawed, and they are, a terrorist organization. And at the same time, the State Department and the White House is receiving and discussing and conducting negotiations with the delegation.
Hold on. One moment. I feel like we have some... No, we don't need to apologize. Yeah.
But Mayor, look, all the jihadists in the world, including now ISIS, etc., they have only one source. The alma mater is the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928.
I agree. I don't like Muslim Brotherhood, but they were democratically elected.
But in the little time we have left, I feel sort of mixed messages, because on one hand we say it's a little bit absurd, the international coalition, the UN, all of these solutions coming from the outside with people that don't really understand the culture and the history of the Middle East. But on the other hand, you have sort of calls that the Arab world needs to solve this for themselves. They need to also be a big part of this. Which is the right answer?
The question is, is democracy going to provide the answer or not? In that case, there are some examples. Again, we can't generalize all of the Arab world, and of course, we all know it. In some countries, such as the United Arab Emirates or other places, of course, I wouldn't want to be a minority there, but you see, people are living; they're well off financially, and we don't see them holding demonstrations for democracy. Again, I think in this region, because of the topography and the geopolitics, the geography being such a tough region to live in, because we're a desert region which is actually running out of water, never mind oil. I think what more and more people will latch onto is a strong head of central figure in order to distribute resources, because it's going to be even more difficult in this region. And some nations, again, I'm not generalizing, God forbid, would be willing to sacrifice democracy in return for a stable life. Who is going to provide that stable life? Some people want a monarch, and in some places, if ISIS can do it, then unfortunately we see them accepting it.
That's what it's going to be for now. One last question in the very little time we have left. With many of these countries in the Arab world, Jordan, who was pulled into the fray recently, also Egypt, when they have within certain populations that adhere to jihadism or that support jihadism, can they really take part in the fight against the Islamic State?
Definitely, yes. Egypt is 90 million people. Those who are going, and joining the ISIS or the Islamic State, you can count them by tens or
they
probably hundreds. They
don't have too great a fear of their domestic population.
No, I think that the majority, we have listened, to Sisi, who said that we need a religious revolution in Islam. He understands what's going on, and he says, clearly that we should change our mentality concerning Islam.
I think we'll have to end this maybe on the simple sentence, the famous sentence, it's the economy, stupid. All of the Middle East.
Yes.
Meir Javedan, Far, Itzhak Lebanon, thanks very much for this.
You.
We're going out for 2 minutes, and we'll be back with the rest of the news today. Don't go anywhere. Egypt calls for UN-backed intervention in Libya, while the country's media reports another 35 Egyptians held captive in Libya by the Islamic State. With the truce in eastern Ukraine all but collapsed and fighting in the key town of Debaltseve, the EU calls for an immediate pullback of heavy weapons. And Israel's state controller releases an annual report, this one documenting excessive spending in the prime minister's residence. Welcome back. We move now out of the Middle East and to Ukraine. In the strategic Ukrainian town of Debaltseve, today's status quo is being described as extremely heavy fighting. This during a ceasefire that began on Sunday with plans for a pullback of heavy weapons. But as Gabi Tartakovsky explains, a withdrawal of arms doesn't seem anywhere near.
Ukraine called upon EU and NATO to condemn the violation of the ceasefire by pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. The fighting between Ukrainian troops and the pro-Russian separatists continued on Tuesday in key towns of Mariupol and Debaltseve. Since Saturday, when the ceasefire first came into effect, 5 Ukrainian soldiers were killed and more than 20 injured. On Monday, rebels claimed control over Debaltseve, where crucial railroads go through. Ukraine denied such reports.
The road is unblocked and is under our control. There are some areas of this village which are under rebel control. A cleansing operation is underway, and we are firing at targets. So I think in the short run we will be in full control.
The Ukrainian army announced it will withdraw its troops, as previously agreed, but only if a ceasefire is truly implemented.
Our servicemen have a complete right to launch fire in response and hold those positions they've been holding for several months. As soon as fire has ceased, we are ready to start withdrawal of heavy weaponry.
7,000 civilians are believed to be still caught in the ongoing crossfire in Debaltseve. So far, European superpowers were reluctant to send troops in aid to Ukraine, but as this ceasefire about to collapse, few options remain untested.
And joining me now from Kiev is journalist Vladimir Solokhub. Vladimir, are you with us?
Yes, good evening. I'm with you.
Good evening. So, what will it take for Ukraine, for its part, say, the Ukrainian government, to actually pull back heavy arms as this ceasefire stipulated? It doesn't seem like it's happening anytime soon.
Well, absolutely not. The strategic town of Debaltseve is still under heavy fighting from both sides, but separatists and Ukrainian side. And the reports on the ground indicate that the separatists are moving closer and closer to encircle the town completely. And more Ukrainian soldiers, basically the fighters on both sides, Ukrainian side and separatist side, are suffering of this continued fighting despite the ceasefire.
So for all practical purposes, there is no real ceasefire at the moment.
Absolutely. Even though the technical ceasefire still exists around the town of Debaltseve, there is absolutely no ceasefire. And the OSCE, which is vested with the mission to monitor the ceasefire, was not able to get into the town for 2 consecutive days. And currently, I'm right now in Kyiv Military Hospital, and just several minutes ago, another portion of Ukrainian soldiers were brought in from the east, around 16 soldiers, which were wounded during the ceasefire.
During the ceasefire. So you mentioned the OSCE, which has now agreed, it's been agreed upon that they will provide monitors on one hand. Then you have the EU calling to pull the heavy weapons back. A long-term effort from Western nations, from Europe, to end this. Is there a sense that from the outside any solution can really be brought? Can anything be done internationally?
Well, looks like there's only international solution, and that solution is to apply more pressure on Russia, which in turn has to apply more pressure on the Russia-backed militants fighting in the East Ukraine to stop firing, to back off from the town of Debaltseve, and start taking away the heavy weapons. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like this will be happening anytime soon, because, as I said, the OSCE, which has been on the ground since the beginning of the conflict, which is in good contact with both sides, were not able to negotiate.
So I guess the key question here is just how much pressure will be needed. Vladimir Solokhub, for now, thanks very much for this.
Thank you.
And moving now back to the Middle East, to Syria, dozens of people died today as the Syrian army launched a new campaign to seize control around the northern city of Aleppo. In the meantime, UN peace envoy Staffan de Mistura introduced a new plan to freeze the fighting in Aleppo. I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira with the details.
The chain around the northern city of Aleppo is tightening as Syrian national forces take over several strategic points outside of Syria's second biggest city on Tuesday. UN peace envoy Staffan de Mistura gave a briefing to the Security Council Tuesday on his efforts in the region, including a plan to freeze the fighting in Aleppo.
The heart of my mission is also to try to facilitate any political process that can lead to a political solution to a conflict which has lasted too long and which has no military solution.
The battle in Aleppo is alongside another major offensive taking place in southern Syria, where Assad's forces, along with their allies in Hezbollah, have launched a large-scale operation to clear the area from the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Nusra Front insurgents. On Monday evening, Hezbollah's leader called the different factions to unite against the Syrian rebels.
Today, the danger is much bigger than all the parties, sectarian and religious calculations, and we also call on an overview concerning this.
The city of Aleppo has been divided between pro-Syrian control and several opposition forces, including the Al-Nusra Front, ever since the battle began in 2012. Now, with Assad's forces seizing more points, perhaps the next step will be entering the town. And in that case, the results may be devastating.
And to Boko Haram, thousands of people marched today in Niger's capital in protest of the terror group. The country has seen attacks launched there from Boko Haram's base in Nigeria. Meanwhile, some developments in the fight against the group. Chad has launched a U.S.-backed counter-terror exercise, and the U.S. military today said it's set to provide communications equipment and intelligence as assistance in the fight. Also on Monday, presidents from the 10-nation Economic Community of Central African States pledged $87 million in an emergency fund to fight the group. And joining me from Lagos, Nigeria, is Samuel Okocha, news editor at The Voice of Nigeria. Samuel, good evening.
Hello, good evening. Good to be with you.
Good to be here with you. So I want to start, there are witnesses recounting hundreds of militants, of Boko Haram militants, storming a town in northeastern Nigeria today. Is there anything you can tell us in terms of an update from there?
Well, information are still filtering in. Because of the nature of the region, it's very difficult to know exactly what has happened. There are times that you have to wait for days before you can get the exact number of people, for example, who died and other casualty figures. But of course, we heard reports that the members of Boko Haram stormed a village in northeastern Nigeria, and a lot of people have fled, and from eyewitnesses reports, a number of people actually lost their lives.
Samuel, looking again to the sort of greater involvement between Chad's involvement and Cameroon, and you also have the African Union pledge of 7,500 troops. As I just mentioned, another pledge of $87 million. There's a lot of mobilization, it seems. How does that compare sort of on the ground? Is there a sense that that is going to help, or that it's just kind of empty pledges?
As far as Nigeria is concerned, it's very difficult to feel the impact of these multinational efforts. You will want to remember that Boko Haram has also made incursions into countries like Cameroon and Chad. And so there is this seeming belief that the coming of Chad, Cameroon, and other neighboring countries is actually to create a buffer zone to prevent Boko Haram from operating in their own soil. And so what we see is this multinational force appears to be driving the militants into Nigeria, wreaking more havoc on locals within Nigeria. And so that is the kind of impact and results Nigerians in the Northeast appear to be seen right now. So the scale of attacks has not reduced.
Samuel Okocha, on that unfortunate bit of news, thanks very much for this for tonight.
Thank you.
And we move to Israel now. The report in the country, it's the report everyone's been waiting for. The state controller has published the findings of a probe examining allegations of a misappropriation of state funds and excessive spending by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife. The News Today's diplomatic correspondent Eli Ochenberg has the details that could have a crucial impact on the coming election.
Precisely 1 month before Israeli elections, and the much-anticipated state controller's report on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's expenses is out with an intimidating conclusion. There is suspected criminal behavior in the alleged bottles and garden furniture affairs, as well as in a third case. The probe examined the spending of the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister's private home in Caesarea, revealing that the Netanyahu family spent, quote, excessive funds at the public's expense. The expenses of both prime ministerial residences almost doubled from 2009 to 2011, with a peak of a bit over $805,000. The report further reveals that in 2011 and 2012, the expenditure on foods and hospitality more than doubled compared to the data during Netanyahu's first year as prime minister. Ordered meals rose to the amount of over $40,000 in 2012, since the residents did not employ an official cook. Cleaning expenses were irregularly high as well, as the controller mentioned these are noticeable exaggerated expenses, with the highest rate in 2011 of almost $300,000. In addition, and maybe most importantly, the state comptrollers announced his suspicion of foul play regarding the bottle affair, in which Sarah Netanyahu was accused of personally taking funds received from recycling state-funded beverage bottles, and the garden furniture affair, in which the Netanyahu family was accused of purchasing new furniture for their private home that was intended for the Prime Minister's residence. In response, the Likud party released a statement in which it relates to serious reduction of expenses in the last 2 years, and pointing to the fact that the report does not offer any comparisons to other official residences in Israel. This creates a significant problem in effectively establishing a proper benchmark for analysis, because expenses of an official residence cannot be compared to that of a private home.
And now to economy. And joining me is economy reporter for the Jerusalem Post, Niv Ellis. Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
So we're here to talk Greece again, and now also bad news again on a bailout deal. Doesn't seem to be going so well.
Right. Every time we talk about Greece, it's usually bad news, and we can expect that it's going to continue being that way, because right now, basically, there is a negotiation going on between Greece and the rest of Europe, in which Greece is trying to get better terms for the debt that it has, for everything that it owes, for all its obligations, and Europe doesn't want to give it to it. So twice this week already there were meetings that collapsed, and basically Greece's bailout is running out at the end of the month. It's going to run out of money. It wants to get no new bailout. It wants to get like an extra loan on the side that doesn't have all those terms attached, all those difficult things, which are hard for it.
Kind of money without the catch?
It wants the money without the cash, basically, while it negotiates a new agreement. And Europe is saying, no. You keep the agreement that we have on the table. We'll maybe talk about extending it. And that's what they've been pushing on back and forth about this week.
There seems to have been an attitude from this Greek prime minister since the beginning that sort of, we don't need you, we'll take care of ourselves on a certain level, but they can't really live without a bailout, without the Eurozone, can they?
If they don't get what they need in order to finish paying off their debts, and they owe billions in the next couple of months, then they're basically going to have to split off from the Eurozone in order to save their banks from collapsing. And even if that happens, they're going to go into a deep recession. They're going to have inflation. They're going to have to reintroduce a currency, revive the drachma from the dead. It's going to be very, very bad.
That sounds very bleak. Will it affect the Eurozone negatively also?
It will affect the Eurozone negatively, because up until now, the Euro is an experiment that's not very old, and it's taking a bunch of economies that are very different and trying to all settle them with one currency and one monetary policy. So basically, up until now, there's been this idea that the euro is whole and it's going to stay whole. Once you're in, you're in. If Greece falls out, then people are going to start saying, well, what about Spain? And what about Portugal? And what about Cyprus? And they're going to start speculating.
Domino effect.
Exactly. So that's one of the reasons that Europe is really taking a hard line here. It doesn't want to give up very much.
Because it could set a new precedent now.
It could set a new precedent, and these same issues are present not to the same extent, but they're there in these other weaker Euro countries.
So the experiment, the Euro experiment continues. Niv Ellis, thanks very much.
Thank you
for being with me. Moving on, rape and murder has been the lot of women since the dawn of history. But now groups of women in the most patriarchal societies are using all means available to generate awareness and actively fight it. I-24 News correspondent Shahar Peled explains how women in Turkey and in India are pushing for change.
Women have had enough, and they're taking matters into their own hands. The brutal rape and murder this week of 20-year-old Özgekan Aslan in Turkey generated mass protests, leading Turkish women to also create a viral Twitter campaign hashtagged Tell Your Story.
We are here today. We revolt, and we will continue to revolt until this stops.
With over 450,000 tweets shared under the hashtag, the women of Turkey are voicing their concerns, as the Turkish press organization Bianet published that 27 women had been murdered in the month of January alone. Turkish women aren't on their own. India's New Delhi has been branded the rape capital of the country following a string of high-profile sexual assaults. A group of female police officers aim to change that.
We'll teach students in schools and colleges, and we'll go to the residential areas where 50 to 100 people can gather, and we'll teach them. So this way, an entire women's army will be created for their defense.
This all-female team has become an elite unit of the Delhi police force in the making. They have been learning karate for almost 6 months so they can defend themselves and impart the skill. Later, they take to the streets, boarding buses to act as a deterrent to harassment.
If we are scared, the men will feel emboldened. I'm not going to be scared of anything.
Over 2,000 rapes were registered with police in Delhi in 2014, igniting its horrendous reputation. But with the growing awareness, women are coming forward in increasing numbers instead of suffering in silence despite the stigma attached to sex crimes in deeply patriarchal societies. Moreover, these new activists hope to inspire confidence in women and prevent the next assault, empowering them to take their security into their own hands.
And a leading Palestinian official has told I-24 News that the Central Committee of the Palestinian Liberation Organization will meet next month, and one of its main issues on the table is a suggestion to stop working by the Oslo Accords. The source told I-24 News that one of the most urgent issues is stopping security coordination with Israel in response to Israeli steps taken earlier, which Palestinians have called unilateral, such as freezing the Palestinian tax revenues. And also on the regional picture in Israel between the Palestinians in the north and Hezbollah, tonight on I-24 News Defense, Alon Ben David speaks with retired Israeli General Amos Yadlin, former head of Israel's military intelligence and currently the Zionist Union's Party candidate for Minister of Defense. Here's some of what he had to say on a grim regional forecast.
During the next 4 years, the chances for another round, whether in the north or in the south, are quite high, because the deterrence of Israel was never so strong on one hand, but the willingness of our enemies to make mistakes and challenge us is also going up. And I can see General Eisenkot leading Israel to another campaign in the north and another campaign in the south, and we have to be ready for it.
And now to sports. With me, of course, is host of the I-24 News Sports Magazine, Jonathan Regev. Good evening.
Evening, Rich.
And we're going to make a sharp transition here from Amos Yadlin and almost certain war all over the place to the Champions League.
Yes. There's only one music I can hear in my head, what every football fan has been hearing. That's the Champions League music. We've been waiting for it for 2 months. Finally, it's back tonight. Not only is it back, but with a giant game. Chelsea, that we see here, are going to play in just about an hour at the Parc des Princes against Paris Saint-Germain. We're in the round of 16 now. Last year it was the quarterfinal. It was a huge matchup. Paris Saint-Germain won the first match in Paris 3-1. Then Chelsea won 2-0 and advanced to the semifinal on away goals. It looks as though Chelsea should win the tie. This one, they look far better than last year. They lead the Premier League. Paris Saint-Germain is having injury issues. They've not been very good throughout the year. But this is a team with Zlatan Ibrahimovic, with Edison Cavani. So even if PSG beats Chelsea, it's not going to be such a major surprise. A lot to look for tonight. Also, Bayern Munich against Shakhtar Donetsk. That's also tonight.
So basically, all friends and family of Champions League fans should just say goodbye now.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, see you sometime in May.
Okay.
Talk to us in May.
What else do you have for us?
We spoke about Paris Saint-Germain, about Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Usually we see him as the man who's only centered with himself. We showed here last week a wax statue.
The wax statue.
Yeah, that's the guy.
That's how I remember him, the wax statue guy.
And that is the image that we have of him. Not exactly wrong, although what you're seeing now, all these tattoos are not just some kind of a design thing. These are names of impoverished children from around the world, hungry children, which he knew that if he tattoos their names on their body, that's going to make a lot of noise, create a lot of attention to the problem of hunger, worldwide hunger, especially among kids. Zlatan Ibrahimovic turned the attention.
It's not all ego.
No, absolutely
nice
not.
To hear
And yes, this is a major campaign which Zlatan Ibrahimovic is participating in, and of course it's very important. Absolutely.
And to another major figure that also lots of women, I'm sure, will be happy to hear about Rafael Nadal.
We thought Rafael Nadal is only a tennis player, right? How about samba dancer? Believe it or not, he's in Rio right now
he's
participating.
One of those people that's just really good at everything.
Yeah, apparently whatever he does is good, and there we see him dancing in the parade. Yes, he's not above one of those trucks. I mean, he has to play tennis today at the Rio Open, and we see it's pouring rain.
We wouldn't want him to hurt himself there.
Exactly, but he did participate in the parade. He did It's the moves. I mean, it's nice to see that
on the tennis court. And
yes, it's nice to see that they're not only centered on the court. There's also the world is far, far bigger than that.
Nice to see that he's a bit of a human because he's kind of superhuman in tennis.
Yes, so. and they're machines on the pitch. So you know what? Sometimes they leave the pitch, and guess what? They're like us.
Jonathan Regev, on that, I like that. They're just like us.
Yes,
thanks very much.
Believe that. Thank you very much.
And moving to quite an incredible story, something completely different. Family history is often an issue of contention, more so perhaps for the heroine of this next story. Jennifer Tegan discovered by chance that her grandfather was a Nazi war criminal. The book she wrote about her family's past is now an international bestseller. Ayman Sikseck met with her during a book tour in Israel to bring us her unlikely story in her own words.
He was known as the Butcher from Plaszow. Amon Gut, commander of the Plaszow concentration camp in German-occupied Poland during World War II, a convicted war criminal, and the grandfather of a German-born black woman.
It was very difficult for me to understand how you could behave the way he behaved. I mean, he's a symbol for human cruelty.
Jennifer Tegan made the shocking discovery of her family's Nazi past during a random visit to a library in Hamburg, much like the one we meet in to discuss her story.
And I saw at a shelf a book with a red cover. And I don't know why, but it grabbed my attention. And on the cover, there was on the left side, there was a small photograph of a woman, an elderly woman. I did not recognize her face immediately, but somehow she looked a bit familiar to me.
The woman was Monika Hertwig, Tegan's biological mother. Having been given up for adoption as a child, Tegan knew little about Monika, but the book brought the pieces together. Hertwig's birth name was Gut. For Tegan, now a mother of two, the discovery was unbearable at first, but it also inspired her to write her own book. Tegan titled it, "My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me."
To share it with a larger audience is something that I decided to do because with the time I understood that it's a story that belongs to me, but the story is much bigger than myself.
Amon Gut gained renewed infamy in 1993 as a central character in Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List. One gut-wrenching scene depicts his habit of casually gunning down Jewish prisoners from his balcony. Tegan decided to visit Plaszow following her discovery.
I needed a symbolic gesture somehow to say goodbye to the victims.
Prior to finding out the identity of her grandfather, Tegan lived in Israel for 5 years in the mid-90s, working at the Goethe Institute in Tel Aviv.
When I first came to Israel, I was a tourist, and I traveled in the country, and I met a guy. I deeply fell in love, and I actually stayed for him. And then I deeply fell in love to the country.
More than a decade later, she has returned to the Institute as a keynote speaker. People gathered in Tel Aviv to hear the story of Tegan's painful past and how, against all odds, she has managed not to allow it to dictate a painful future.
And with me for more on the story that seems like fiction is correspondent Ayman Sikseck. We just saw you in the report. Tell me more. I understand that she doesn't think it's about her Nazi grandfather's past, but it's not all about the Holocaust.
That's right, Nurit. She made a huge name for herself with this book and the story that she's telling. But it was very important for her to say that it's not all about the Holocaust, it's about identity, it's about really complex modern family relations. She herself was given up for adoption at a very early age, and she described how her identity was broken prior to discovering who her grandfather was. She always felt like there were pieces in her life, in the puzzle of her life, that were missing. So it's really about a look at how the framework of family in this modern time has in some way disintegrated.
Did this discovery, as sort of seemingly negative and dramatic as it is, sort of help her rebuild that identity, form that identity?
Well, I was surprised to hear when she said yes, actually. It made her somewhat happier because she felt throughout her life that there were different things that she didn't know about her past, and discovering this shocking secret eventually, after she got over the initial painful feelings, actually made her a happier person, and today she's extremely successful because of this book.
It's interesting how just knowledge, understanding where you came from, whether it's objectively, subjectively good or bad, really helps put together who you are.
That's right. And, you know, I think what her story really proves is in this century that's been so war-torn and there's been so much migration from one place to the other, really identity, both racial and national, has become so fluid.
It's a fluid subject. That's exactly the word that pops into my head.
Exactly. And in a way, I think just like her, we are all, especially here in Israel, products of war. And in her case, it's really, really clear how war has made her who she is, for good and bad.
How, from reading the book and sitting down with her, how has that war, has she sort of overcome that?
Well, one of the points that she really wanted to stress was this issue of guilt that the German public is supposed to still feel. And she feels that in this generation of young Germans, guilt is no longer an issue. There shouldn't be guilt anymore. Right. These are people that weren't involved in the war, obviously.
They shouldn't carry the burden with them still.
They absolutely shouldn't carry the burden with them, she feels. But she does say that Germany still has a responsibility to keep the story alive. And in a way, that's what she's doing with this book, this provocatively titled book.
Interesting how one woman's look at identity in a very kind of crazy story is actually relevant to all of us in some way, one way or another. I'm in Siksek. Thanks very much for this.
Thank you, Nolit.
And we're going out for 2 minutes, a 2-minute break, and then we're back with the Daily Debate, Israel Elections 2015, and of course the report on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Don't go anywhere.